to be back with you. Okay, so today is a bit of I think the way Helen would say this, it's a bit of a hodgepodge. I'm just there's a lot to go through, and I have different pieces that I want to review. There's a couple things I really want to mention to you that we missed while I was away. And some things I want to do a deep dive into, and some things that are pieces that I've only recently learned myself that I want to share with you. So we missed a couple of important things while I was away. And so I want to go back over two of them. One is the episode of the Daughters of Tzlefchad, which is found in Parshat Pinchas. And the other is a general introduction to Devarim, which is the fifth of the five books of Moses. And the last. And so, my husband has a program that let me backtrack and say that when Elul comes in, we are now in the month of Av. Okay. We have, it is, I don't even, well, we just had it's about the 11th day of Av. So we're in the first third of the month. And right after Av comes Elul, and Elul is preparation for Rosh Hashanah. And so there's a custom to blow shofar every day of Elul to prepare people spiritually for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the whole high holiday season. So my husband has a custom of having a program the first day of Elul. And I don't know, I don't know why I started telling you guys this, but uh anyway, I don't remember why I started telling you that. Oh, right, got it. Okay. So, because the book of Devarim is the last of the five books, we are actually going to finish the cycle around the high holiday period because sometime in October, which sounds kind of far away, but it's not really. And I was thinking, I think I mentioned this at least once before, that I was thinking that the next cycle, I mean, honestly, we could do Parsha over and over and over again for the rest of our lives. But I thought that I might do the Haftorah in the cycle for next year, starting after Simchas Torah. But we're still in Devarim. We're still in the last of the five books of the Bible. And we are right now, I want to talk about the Benot Tzlefchad, the daughters of Tzlefchad, you will find in the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, chapter 27, verses 1 through 11. And this is their basic story. And I think you'll understand why I wanted to make sure to highlight this. I also um, I also happen to have a book about them, which I highly, highly recommend, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Okay, so here's the story. There's these five daughters. There are no sons in the family. The five daughters are called Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah. Not exactly like very well-known names. There's no sons in the family. There's no parents in the family. Okay. And so it is now the time when the land of Israel is being divided by family. And so each man gets an inheritance. There's a certain portion of the land that is given to the tribe. And within that, there's a parcel of land that's devoted to each family. And within that, each head of household, I guess you would say, gets a portion of the land. But this family has no male head of household. So these five sisters, Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah, approach Moshe and the leaders of the people at that time, and they have a bold request. So the they say that their father, whose name was Salafchad, which is also not an easy name, died without sons, and they don't want his portion in the land of Israel to vanish because there's no son to give it to. And so they're asking for a decision a legal decision about what should be done in a case like this. I don't want to go into the specifics of it, what their argument was, but basically they made an argument in law um, for why they should be, they as daughters, because there's no male in the family, why they should be granted this portion of the land. And Moshe, he doesn't know what to do with this situation. He's never faced this situation before. And so he brings their case directly to God. And God responds, the daughters of Tzalefchad speak rightly, meaning they are granted the right to inherit their father's portion in the land of Israel, which leads to a new precedent in the laws of inheritance. Now, in order to have brought this, to have a woman, let alone this group of five women in Tanakh, make an argument in Jewish law is quite rare. I There is some hint in Abigail, who was one of the first wives of King David, but it's very rare. So the question is, what do the rabbis have to say about these five women? So God has sort of put his stamp of approval on their request, but what do the rabbis have to say? So I'm very delighted to say that the rabbis are extremely, extremely positive about these five women. And I'll give you some examples. So Rashi, the most famous biblical commentator that we have, says that their claim, why are they asking for this land? They are motivated by chibat haaretz, which means love for the land, a connection, a sense of connection to the land, that the daughters wanted a portion of the land, not for financial reasons, not for material gain, but in order to preserve their father's name among the inheritors. And they weren't just saying, "Wah, wah, we don't get anything. That's not fair." They were reasoning from Torah law. Okay. And that the rabbis have a lot of respect for. That another commentator says that their approach wasn't emotional. It was halachic. It was a legal reasoning, and they sought not entitlement but justice. Yet another commentator emphasizes that they spoke with wisdom, they spoke with eloquence, they spoke with legal precision. And who are they talking to? They are talking to Moshe and Eleazar, who was his nephew, and the leaders of the people. And they are doing it in a way that demonstrates their facility with the law and also their de- decorum. Um, and although it was kind of bold of them to go to Moshe in this public place, they went with a sense of trust that God would make this work out for them. Their righteousness is highlighted by rabbis over and over again, um, and the indication that we have that they did the right thing is that their petition for their particular case triggered a clarification in the law and revealed that where there are no sons, that daughters may inherit. That was the final conclusion. So what do we learn from them? Um, One thing that we learn from them is that it is possible to challenge the system from within the system without being emotional, just with wisdom, with conviction, and so forth. We learn that Torah law does have channels for expansion. When there's something legitimate to base it on, Torah law can adapt. And also that the women's voices can have, it isn't something that we see all that often, but it can have an impact in Torah because their argument was so compelling that it became the Torah law itself. Now, I want to tell you something. I told you a couple of times the names of these five daughters. So when I was pregnant with my second daughter, I wanted to name her Tirza because I think it's a pretty name. It's not unheard of in Jewish world, but it's not like so common. I wanted to name her Tirza because I really like this story and the idea of naming my child after one of these women who, spoke up and was so honorable in the eyes of the rabbis. So I'm very pregnant. It's the end of my pregnancy. I'm planning on naming her Tirza. And then for a couple of nights in a row, I have a dream about my grandmother, who at the time I didn't know her Hebrew name, but we called her Grandma Rose. and Rose in Hebrew is Shoshana. And I felt like that was sort of a message from the next world, and that I ought to not to name my daughter after my grandmother who passed away when I was a teenager. So that's what I did. So I don't have a daughter named Tirza, but I do have a daughter named Shoshana. Okay, this is a book called The Daughters Victorious. I will put a link in the WhatsApp group. It, it is the story of the daughters of Tzlefchad that is written in a novel form. The reason I'm mentioning it to you is because now there's a number of books like this that take biblical stories and make them biblical passages and make them into novels, but this one is Torah. Some of them are so far, and I'm thinking specifically now about the Red Tent, which maybe initiated this genre, but some of them are so far from uh, being based in Torah that they really take the core of a biblical story and just make fiction out of it. But this one is like sort of a narrative dramatization of the story of these five daughters, but it is very well sourced in scripture and in rabbinic commentary. And so if it's I read it a couple of times. I enjoyed the story, and I highly recommend it to you. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to catch up on because we missed Parsha Pinchas. Now, I just want to do a brief introduction to Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, which we call Devarim. Devarim literally means words. It also means things. Um, the entire Sefer Devarim, the entire book of Deuteronomy, is essentially Moshe's farewell speech to his people before they enter the land of Israel. He knows already he's not going to get to go, and he's reviewing with them the last 40 years that they've spent together in the desert. There's some rebuke, but it is done with gently and lovingly. He reteaches some mitzvot, some of the biblical commandments, and he introduces some new ones. And he sets up the people with a spiritual mindset that they are going to need when they enter the land of Israel. So there's not a lot of story. It's not narrative. It's a speech. The entire book is a speech. And it's filled with ethical and spiritual teachings that help guide character development and reminders of God's expectations of them. And um, so that's the context of the book itself. So you'll see things in Sefer Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, that you've seen before because it's a review. Okay, so in last week's parsha, which has the same name as the entire book. I'll just remind you that this works for all of the five books, that the name of the book in Hebrew is also the name of the first parsha, and it's also the first significant word in the book. Okay. So in last week's parsha, which is Parshat Devarim in Sefer Devarim, the Torah portion of Devarim in the book of Devarim, we begin with Moshe's opening speech. He begins his final address and he's recounting the entire journey from Sinai to the border of the land of Israel. He reviews their failings, but in a sort of a veiled way. It's not a fire and brimstone kind of a speech. He's recounting how judges and leaders are appointed, or have been appointed to share the burden. He retells the story of the sin of the spies, which is the central story that leads to the 40 years in the wilderness. You may remember that when the sin of the spies happens, they're actually about to enter the land. And when the sin of the spies, where 10 of the 12 spies come back with this awful report about the land of Israel, it sets them back 39 years. So it was not supposed to take 40 years in the desert. It was supposed to take a year or so. But they had to wait. If you remember, we talked about this many times for the now, this is where people misspeak and they say the entire generation of that time, but you know better now. You know that it was only the men between the ages of 20 and 60 who were sentenced to to die in the desert. And so they had to wait for all of them to die. That's what was taking so long, was that 39 years. And then he reviews some of the recent military victories as preparation for entering the land. That's the beginning of the book of Devarim, very, very briefly. Now, this week, we are in the Parshat of Ve'et-Hanan. This is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 3, verses 23 through chapter 7, verse 11. The name of the Parsha, Ve'et-Hanan, means I entreated. It's Moshe talking. And he tells the people how he begged God to allow him to enter the land of Israel, but God refused to let him. And instead, he instructs him to go up on a mountain and to see the entire promised land. I have got to send you, as I'm telling you this, I'm thinking about a song that a friend of mine did. It's on YouTube, and it is a song about Moses pleading with God, let me just go in there for a day, for an hour, for a minute. It's so, maybe I shared this with you before when when this incident first happened, but I'll send you a link to that song. It's very, very poignant. Anyway, he's continuing. So Moshe's continuing his whole review, and he's describing the exodus from Egypt and the giving of the Torah. And he's saying that these are unprecedented in human history. They were then, and they continue to be. And he uses the words, has there ever occurred this great thing, or the likes of it ever been heard? Did a people ever hear the voice of God speaking out from the midst of the fire and live? You were shown to know that the Lord is God. There is none else besides him. And then Moshe predicts that in future generations that the people are going to turn away from God. They're going to start worshiping idols. They're going to be exiled from their land. They're going to be scattered among the nations. And from there, they will seek God again and try to return and obey his commandments. This parsha also includes a repetition of the Ten Commandments, which is originally in the book of Exodus, chapter 20. And it is also includes the verses of the Shema, which is the fundamental teaching of Judaism, the unity of God. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. It also includes the mitzvah to love God, to study his Torah. And then it has some words to say about binding these words as tefillin, which I hope you know what they are, so I don't know how to describe them, on the arm and on the head that only men wear, and to inscribe them on the mezuzah scroll that is affixed to the doorpost of our house. That's all that language. Also, Shema also mentions tzitzit. I want, not now, but jot this down if you're taking notes, to look at the difference in the Ten Commandments about what it says about Shabbat in Exodus chapter 20 verses 8 through 10, and in our parsha in Devarim in Deuteronomy chapter 5 verses 12 through 15. So the first time that the commandment of Shabbat is given, it's related to creation. And in our parsha, it's related to the liberation from slavery in Egypt. I find that very helpful. Reading Ve'et-Hanan, reading this parsha to me feels like a message from a loving parent before their child goes off, let's say to college, or goes off on their own. Moshe's tone is strong, but it's not punitive. I personally read a lot of love in his words. He has cared for these people for all of these years, and he is um, trying to give them with his word. That's all he has now to give them, trying to prepare them for how dramatically their lives are going to change when they enter the land of Israel. When I was in Florida recently, in my sister's community, I think I told you about this. I did two workshops on making challah. And while the challah dough was rising, I taught about this concept that when the Israelite nation was in the desert, God provided the food. There was supernatural food. In Hebrew, we call it mun. In English, we call it manna. And it had we probably have spoken about this before. It had a number of supernatural qualities. For one thing, it was wholly absorbed in the body, so people didn't need to use the restroom. There was no waste product created, which is actually very helpful when when you're wandering around before the invention of porta potties. They were they did not need that because they fully the the food was just fully absorbed. Another thing is that they say that it had the taste of whatever you wanted to taste like. All of that was one of the miracles with which God sustained his people in the 40 years in the desert. However, as they are going to enter the land of Israel, they are going to have to provide for themselves. And that's actually now they're going to have to make their own bread. And that is where the mitzvah of challah it's not relevant when they're in the desert. There's no reason to make bread. They're getting heavenly bread. They're getting manna from heaven, literally. But I taught them this idea that now, once they cross into the land of Israel, a lot of the supernatural things that accompanied them in their wanderings in the desert were going to disappear, and their lives were going to become more um, well, they were going to have to work harder to provide for themselves. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my three favorite words. I also have a two favorite word phrase, but my three, which is in the book of Genesis, but my three favorite word phrase is in this parsha in chapter 4, verse 35. And the words are Ein od milvado, which means there is none besides him. The full phrase is the Lord, he is God, there is none besides him. So on a very simple level, this verse is a declaration of the oneness and the sovereignty of God. And it's part of this speech where Moshe is saying Hashem is one. There are no other gods. There's no other forces. There's no other powers. However, I want to go a little bit more deeply with you into this. There's one commentator who emphasizes that Ein od milvado means even celestial beings. So he's speaking like the sun, the moon, angels, they have no independent power. Ein od milvado is not merely monotheism. It's an assertion that not only that God is one, but there is nothing else. Okay, that all apparent power, all intermediaries, all forces are subordinate, contingent, and nullified before the power of God. Let's go a little deeper together. It's not Ein od milvado it's not a protection from evil, but it means that even evil exists within God because there's nothing outside of him. So not even evil. So there's a book that one of my study partners and I have been learning for many months now. It's very deep and very heavy. It's called Knowing God's Plan in English. And it talks about why God introduces evil into the world. But the concept is that evil is a tool of God and that it is only temporary, that eventually the world will be perfected and there won't be a need for evil. But the concept here is that there is nothing outside of God. Okay, that when you internalize these three words, Ein od milvado, everything that you are fearful of dissolves because there's no room for anything except the presence of God. Now, later on, I'm speaking of later on in Jewish history, the other commentators say that not only is God the only power, but nothing else actually exists independently. Everything in the physical world is a manifestation of divine will. Everything in existence is godliness, but it's concealed. If the concealment was lifted, according to this way of thinking, there would only be God. And this idea becomes the basis for true trust in God, because if nothing else exists outside of God, there is no independent action, and therefore there's no room for fear or despair or any of those kinds of emotions. So it is a very strong um, it's a very strong principle that helps to strengthen one's imuna. But I'm not finished yet. I want to go on because these three words are so incredibly deep and mind-bending. So, okay, now we're looking at Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, 19th century. He says, from our perspective, the world exists and we have to act within it. He doesn't want people, like, this is not a Jewish thing to like transcend reality and detach from worldly responsibilities. There are faith systems that do that, and they believe that that's when you really soar spiritually. We live in a natural world, but the deeper truth is that the natural world exists within Hashem, that the entire world, however you understand this, is held entirely within his being. Existence is not besides God. Everything, everything is all contained within him. So it is mind-blowing to acknowledge that everything is God, because we operate as if the entire world is kind of divided into me and not me. We have a sense of ourselves as independent entities, separate from God. Like there's me, there's God, there's other people, there's the books on my shelf, there's the food in my fridge, there's the animals in the world, whatever. Um, but if we take Ein Od Milvado to its logical conclusion, all of it is a part of God. And the sense that we have about being an independent self is illusory. Now, I find that quite mind-blowing. And it's so different from the way most of us go through our day, but that's the essence of this teaching. There's okay, in the 16th century in Sfat, there was Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, we sometimes call him the Ramak. He says the essence of divinity is found in every single thing. Nothing but it exists. There's nothing outside the divinity of God. So Ein Od Milvado um, is a sort of a lesson for us on how we should behave, as if we recognize that everything and everyone is a part of God. Everything and everyone is interconnected. And the implication of that is that everything matters. How we treat one another, how the world functions, the need to be thoughtful, everything is sacred because it's all indivisible from God. All right. It's a hard concept. I think I've hammered it enough. So I just want to talk about a couple of feminine themes that we find in this parsha. One is so I mentioned to you that in this parsha come the words of the Shema, and there is a feminine voice um, in Shema because we speak about teaching your children in the Shema prayer. Um, and the commentators say that includes both parents, but the maternal role, the feminine role in the education of children is gentle repetition, emotional connection, modeling faith in God, as opposed to, let's say, the more intellectual or legalistic parts of transmitting Jewish tradition. So the Shema has this sort of feminine in this part of it. It has a sort of feminine quality of transmitting tradition to children. Also, the land itself is feminine. The land of Israel is often personified as being feminine, and Moshe's desire to enter the land it's a kind of pining for the land. It reflects a kind of relationship almost like of love, of nurturing, of closeness. There's a kind of, if you can hear it in what I'm saying, a spiritual feminine energy that the land has, awaiting the receipt of her people. There's also a very feminine association with Shabbat. Shabbat is a feminine aspect of time. I told you that the Ten Commandments are repeated in this parsha and that Shabbat figures prominently. And Shabbat is linked to the Shekhinah, which is the feminine divine presence. And Shabbat is also a time of receptivity, of rest, of connection, which are classically feminine spiritual modes. Now, on Tisha B'Av, I'm transitioning to this thing I just learned myself. On Tisha B'Av, when we fast, so we are actually not allowed to learn most kinds of Torah because Tisha B'Av is a day of mourning, paralleling Shiva, which is the when you mourn for a family member, one of seven categories of family members: mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, and spouse. Um, and so we're not allowed to learn Torah exactly, but the study partner and I were learning a piece of Torah that was written for Tisha B'Av, and I came across this concept that I had never heard before, the idea that Mashiach could be a married couple. So I did a little research into this because in all of my years, I had never heard this concept. And so there is actually an opinion that Mashiach could be two individuals, a husband and a wife, reflecting the masculine and the feminine. But what I think is more likely, but we'll find out. Hopefully, we'll all find out together, that Mashiach represents the rectification of this hierarchy between male and female, masculine and feminine, that was created in the Garden of Eden after the sin of the Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So there's sort of like a plan A, the way that God built the world with a balance between masculine and feminine. And one of the consequences of the sin in the Garden of Eden is that male became dominant over female. And all of human history has been a process of rectifying that. It was not God's original plan. It's a consequence of the sin. And at the end of days, we are taught to expect that the proper balance between masculine and feminine will be fully restored. And this is the way that I understand the idea that Mashiach will be a couple, that the Mashiach personality will be so rectified that even though it's a male body, he will represent the reunification of both male and female in the way that it was originally intended. Now, I don't know if I'm correct about this. It's what makes the most sense to me. It could be that it literally means that the Mashiach personality will end up being two human beings. That will be that was such a new idea for me. I knew I wanted to share with you that would be very interesting. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is Tu B'Av and the circle dance in the vineyards. So what am I talking about? This Friday night and Shabbat is Tu B'Av, literally the 15th of the month of Av. And related to what we just talked about of this masculine and feminine thing, I want to share a lesson from one of my teachers, Rebbetzin Devora Fasthag, about this mystical day of Tu B'Av. Now, let me first say I'm gonna speak about it from a spiritual perspective, but today in Israel, and this really shocked me when um, Tu B'Av is sometimes, you'll understand why more when I say more about it, but it's like the Israeli Valentine's Day. So if you go to the mall now in Israel, you'll see, like, those like little stuffed bears that say like I love you and all that stuff. So they they merchant it's not to the extent that it is in other places, but there is some merchandising of Tu B'Av as if it's a Valentine's Day for Israel, but it is obviously much, much deeper. So let's talk about that a little bit. On the 15th day of the month of Av, and also on Yom Kippur, in biblical times, the unmarried young girls, I don't mean young like five, I mean like marriageable age, but single girls, would go out in the vineyards and dance a circle dance. And then the unmarried young men would go there to choose a wife. There's a commentator that connects this circle dance of these unmarried young women to the circle dance done by Miriam and the women after the splitting of the sea. Because at that time, Miriam, who was a prophetess, and the Jewish women that were alive in that generation brought down the power of something we call in Hebrew Nikeva Tisovev Gever. And the dance of the, I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. The dance of the daughters of Jerusalem also represents Nikeva Tisovev Gever. What is that? Literally, it means, it's a hard phrase to translate. Nikeva means feminine. Tisovev means like to encircle, and gever is one of the words that we use for male. So the idea is like the feminine will encircle the male. It's a prophecy that comes from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, verse 21. And the ultimate sense of this is that at the end of days, women will become equal with men. If you think about a circle, everybody in the circle is sort of equidistant from the center. It's a very different structure than a hierarchy. Right now, we live in a hierarchical society. Western society, some people have more power, some people have less power. Some people have greater access to resources, lesser access to resources. That's hierarchy. And right now, we are still, it is beginning to change somewhat, but we are still living in a time where male is higher on the hierarchy than female. But the idea is that Nikeva Tisovev Gever, that it will all become a circle. It emphasizes this prophecy that ultimately there will be equality. Now, the Talmud describes the dance in this way. It says, there were no days as good for Israel as the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. On those days, the daughters of Jerusalem would go out in borrowed white vessels. They mean dresses, borrowed white dresses, so as not to embarrass those who did not have. And the daughters of Jerusalem would go forth and make circle dances in the vineyards. And what did they say? They said to the young men that were there, young man, lift up your eyes and see what you are choosing. And we learned that any young man who was unmarried would go there and look and see if there was a wife for him there. This is how the singles of Jerusalem in this time would spend Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. Now, and the sages are saying that there were no days as good for Israel as these days. It doesn't seem like, it sounds sort of like a I don't know, some inappropriate dating ritual or something. But there's a lot of deeply symbolic, and also in the same way that I spoke about the daughters of Tzalefchad being having a lot of decorum in going to speak to Moshe and the elders. So this was also done with a lot of dignity. This wasn't like a meat market kind of thing. I want you to, if that's in your head, I want you to put that out of your head. One of the rabbis that says that the circle dance of these girls is represented the future circle dance that the righteous individuals will do around God. So God will be in the center, so to speak, and the righteous will dance around God, however you understand that. It's an image that represents equality because everybody, even today in Judaism, there's lots of different approaches. There's not everybody agrees on how to handle everything. We have arguments among rabbis. Hopefully they're respectful, but they are philosophical differences and so forth. There's not a sense that there's only one way of doing things. But this community can have its way, and this community can have its way, and this community can have their way, and they're all equally connected to God. It has a different flavor. Like think of a chocolate cake. This is what comes to mind. Okay, think of a chocolate cake. There's, I don't know, 15 of us here on online together. We may all make chocolate cake, and I want to look at what Kathy's comment is, but we may all make chocolate cake, but we all use a different recipe. Okay. Um, Okay, so Kathy says, when I studied this, it sounded like all the women dressed in white linen, so they were all on the same level. Each was chosen for who they were as a person rather by status. They all had equal status. There is something to that. Remember what I said about the part where um, they borrowed dresses from each other. So it wasn't um, there was like also that kind of level of equality. There wasn't a sense that, oh, this must be a rich girl because her dress is fancy, and this is a poor girl because her dress is tattered. So I don't think they wore linen like I mean, maybe the dresses were made of linen. I don't know. But the idea is that there was again equality among them, equality between them. That this circle dance is you circle around and around. There's no higher, there's no lower, there's no beginning, there's no end. And so in the future, there will be no jealousy, there will be no hatred, no saying this one is higher than that one. And that's the goodness of this day, when there's no jealousy and hatred and competition among people. And further, that the girls in the circle dance were representing this idea of Nikeva Tisovev Gever, that everybody serving God is equal. And and again, another echo is what we were just talking about, this idea of equality in their behavior, that they all wore these borrowed white garments so that they didn't embarrass people who didn't have. So this is another messianic promise of not just equality between men and women, not just equality among people who serve God, but also economic equality. So there's not haves and have-nots. Everybody has the same. That's also another promise of the Messianic era. Um, and then he goes on to explain that this took place on the 15th day of the month of Av, which alludes to the 15th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is the letter Samech, which is very interesting because if you think about this, the letter Samech, it has the form of a circle. It is an entirely enclosed circle, and the circle represents equality. Um, and another layer of this is that what was at the beginning of creation will be in the future when all the rectification is complete. So there's layer on top of layer on top of layer of Tu B'Av in the circle dance, and it goes way beyond giving the person that you love a bear with a heart. Okay, so one more thing. Why is this dance done specifically in a vineyard? One of the things that it symbolizes is that marriage, it can be like wine, can be compared to wine. That wine should only be used for holy occasions, right? Like to make a blessing on wine that you drink on Shabbat. When wine is used, this is a very Jewish way of thinking. When wine is used properly, it brings gladness, meaning in a measured way. But when wine is overdone, when it's abused, it leads to evil. And similarly, marriage, when it's done in accordance with the Torah, is a holy thing. Marriage, as well as human sexuality, is connected to holiness and it's designed to bring joy to the heart. But when the union of a man and a woman is not according to Torah, it has the same potential for degradation that the abuse of alcohol has. So there's a connection. Also, there's the idea that perhaps the vineyard is connected to rectifying the sin of Chava, because according to one opinion, the fruit I'm sure I've said this to you before, that the fruit in the Garden of Eden that Chava, that Eve gave Adam to ingest, 100% it was not an apple. I don't know where that comes from. There's no source of that. There's different Torah opinions about what the fruit was, but it was 100% not an apple. But one opinion is that it was grapes. So then it becomes symbolic that the vineyard where the circle dance took place, because when that sin, the sin that happened in the Garden of Eden, is forgiven, the word for forgiven in Hebrew is machul. Everyone will be again in a circle dance, which is machol, where nikeva tisovev gever, where all is equal. So there's just all this symbolism built into this circle dance, into this practice. Now, I've never seen this happen on Tu B'Av. I don't know that it doesn't still happen, obviously. But there is a teaching that King Saul met his wife at one of these circle dances. Um, okay. And I just want to end with a couple of life lessons from this Parsha of Ve'etchanan. And the first one is the concept of persistence in prayer. There's a tradition that Moses prayed 515 times, begging God to let him enter the land of Israel. Where do we get this number 515? The name of the parsha is Ve'etchanan, and remember I told you it means I entreated, I pleaded. The numerical value of the Hebrew word Ve'etchanan is 515. And so even though he was ultimately denied, we learn not to give up on a prayer that comes from our heart. Sometimes the answer is no, but the effort to persist in prayer when there's something that we need, that effort matters. There's also the lesson of the power of memory. One of the things that Moshe is telling people is not to forget what they saw at Sinai, because many of the men who were at Sinai, who were between the ages of 20 and 60, were no longer alive, but all of the women and the young children, and there were people listening to this long speech of Moshe's at the end of his life that were at Sinai. And he's saying, don't forget what you saw at Sinai. Memory isn't a passive thing, it requires effort. And keeping our core values and experiences alive through active remembrance is actually the essence of, I'm going to call them Jewish holidays, you may call them biblical holidays, but every holiday, and maybe this is true about other holidays too, I'm not sure, is an anniversary of, it's the marking of something that happened in the past. So when we have a Passover Seder, for example, we tell the story to our children of what God did for us in Egypt. Every time we have Rosh Hashanah, we are reminded of how God created the world. Every time we have Shavuot, we are reminded of how God gave the Torah to the Israelite nation at Sinai. So memory is something that we work on and that we transmit. We also transmit our values to the next generation. And in the words of the Shema, it says we teach our children diligently. Education isn't just about transferring knowledge, it's also about modeling values, living them authentically, and that is actually in the realm most often of the mother. And then the last life lesson is that, and I know I've repeated this ad nauseum, but there is nothing more important in all of Torah than this concept of Hashem is one. So it's a reminder to look for unity and meaning and divine presence, even though the world looks fragmented. But the declaration that Hashem is one, it grounds our lives with purpose. If the world appears to us fragmented, we can rest assured in these lessons that it is not fragmented, that it is all part of a divine unity. Okay. Well, that's what I prepared. Like I said, it was a little bit of a lot of things that I wanted to share with you. We do have a few minutes left. If anybody has a question or a comment, anything that you want to ask about, Elizabeth, you go ahead. Just unmute yourself if you're not already unmuted.
Yeah.
And okay.
You mentioned the three words. What were those three Hebrew words again? I wanted to write them down.
All right, I'm gonna spell them for you in English. Okay.
Okay.
The first word is Ein, E-I-N. The second word is Ode, O-D.
Okay.
I'm writing them. And the third word is Milvado, Milvado. I have got to tell you guys something. So I was in America and there's this brand of water bottles. I forgot to bring it. It's in the kitchen. I don't want to get up and show it to you, but I'll take a picture of it and I'll show it to you. There's a brand of water bottles called Hydro Flask. And one of the things that they offer is you can engrave a water bottle from them for a few dollars. You could put a pretty picture or words, whatever. I bought a water bottle that says that I had them engraved with Ain Od Milvado when I was in America. It's not the water bottle I'm drinking from now, but I want to send you a picture of that. Remember, see, I told you that those were three of my favorite Hebrew words. And actually, I'm going to show you something else. Hang on just a second. It's in the office. I just have to get up and get it. There's a woman who's in our group, but I've never actually seen her live. Her name is Shelley Davis. She lives in Texas. And a number of years ago, she said to me, "What are your favorite words in all of Tanakh?" And I don't know, I thought she was being conversational. And so I told her, Ein Od Milvado. Now, she gave us this gift. My husband chose a different phrase, and it is a wood plaque. This it's let me, you know what? Let me change my background just temporarily so that because I really want you to see this. Um, all right, now you see my bookshelf. Okay, now you can see it better. So it's wait, Ein Od Milvado. This is it in Hebrew, and this is this beautiful wood plaque that was one of the most meaningful gifts. My water bottle says it in English because Hydro Flask Company does not engrave things in Hebrew. Um, but we actually, now that I think about it, it's such an important part of the way that I um, live in the world that there's another place in our house, there's another decoration that also says Enod Milvado in Hebrew. And the next time any of you come to our home for a Shabbat meal, I will point it out to you. Anybody else? Linda, you want to ask something?
Yes, I wanted to ask about this circle dance being done also on Yom Kippur. I normally just think about that as the fast day and confessions and all that, but this happy event was also going on Yom Kippur.
Right. And it seems like not an appropriate thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Uh-huh.
it's like speed dating or something. Like, why are you doing that on Yom Kippur? So it doesn't seem to match, and it isn't done anymore. But I guess in those days, making matches is on one level, it's holy activity, but on another level, as I'm thinking about it, Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, as you probably know, the day when God
Hmm.
forgives. And remember, we talked about this idea of this dance. Yes, it is to make matches. Yes, young men and women did get together after these dances, but there's all this other deeper symbolism. And
Hmm.
so it's not always the case that the only way to connect with God or the only way to connect with God's um, wishes for us is by prayer and fasting and all that. That's how we think of Yom Kippur now. Um, Now in the future there won't be a Yom Kippur anymore because there won't be sin anymore. There'll be nothing that we need to atone for, which is a mind-blowing concept. But I guess in those days in Jerusalem that was done. That's
Hmm.
um it's a fascinating historical tidbit.
Yeah. Hmm. Thank you.
Sure. And anybody else? One more question? Comment? Anything? No, you're good?
I
Hi,
I could
Vicky.
say something. Hi. So glad to see you. Um, so I wanted to just for you to explore a little more on how you see so much evil in the world. I can see all of, personally very difficult and terrible things even happen when as a child. And you ask yourself in the Jewish mindset how literally, which is actually kind of foreign to me, and I wanted to see if you could send me some information, but that literally everything comes from Hashem, which it makes perfect sense the way that you explained it. But at the end of the day, how is it that you reconcile all of the evil as well? Does that make any sense?
It totally makes sense. It reminds me of a question that Helen asked. I think on Tisha B'Av, I listened again to the class that we had on anti-Semitism, and I think that Helen asked a very similar question. And because we tend to see the world, I hope this is going to satisfy you because it is somewhat esoteric, but we tend to see the world as fragmented. And the whole concept of Ein Od Milvado conceptually is that there is nothing outside of God, which means that evil exists within God, which means that evil is a tool that God uses. Okay. And the it's a tool that ensures that people have free choice. Now, people can overdo it. And I'll give you an example of this. Also on Tisha B'Av, there was a video about how the Vatican is holding the menorah from the Holy Temple. You're probably aware of this, right? That the Vatican has
Yes.
all this. Okay.
All the
And
things.
all the things that apparently they have many, many, many artifacts that are of historical interest to the Jewish people, but the menorah is like probably the most important one. And in Rome, there is something called the Arch of Titus, and it depicts Titus, who was a Roman leader, general, or whatever he was, who sacked Jerusalem and carried all of the vessels of the Holy Temple into Rome. Now, Titus, who we call him Titus, but he believed that he was greater than God because look what he did. He destroyed the house of God, carried off all of its vessels, and brought it to Rome. But the irony of history is that he only ruled for 18 months, and God punished him by something. I heard it was a worm or an insect of some kind went up his nose and into his brain, and he was plagued for the rest of his life with debilitating migraines that
Wow.
nobody could cure. And what are we saying? We're saying that God needed to punish the Jewish people in Israel. Titus was the vehicle that God chose with which to punish the people. However, he got a little carried away. He went too far. He overstepped into this other realm. And so God punished him. So yes, there is evil. We see the same principle if you go all the way back to the time of slavery in Egypt, that the Egyptians were charged with enslaving the nation, the Israelite nation, but they did it with such cruelty that was on them. It's like they took their job and went like way too far. So we have sort of like necessary evil as a tool of God that's necessary. And then there's people that take it too far and then they end up getting punished. I don't know if that exactly answers your question because it's such a deep, deep question. Like, how could a God that's good allow for anything evil? One of the things that I believe, because I so firmly believe in this principle of Ein Od Milvado, is that it's all going to make sense at the end.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because what came to my mind when you were even talking about the Vatican, in a lot of ways, they've actually kept it safe, if you think about it, because they're going to have to give it up. We're building this temple and in the mighty name of Hashem. And so I could see what you're saying. And then, of course, he can't make us, he didn't make us robots. So he deals with humanity in the free choice that
Right.
we're given, but he always has a good thing that happens to us.
Right.
He
So if
turns
there's
it
no
around.
So if there's no evil, how could we have free choice? How, if
Right.
everything is only good, how can you earn merit, spiritual merit, by doing what God says if there's no evil? So that's another little piece of it that you're sort of
Mhm.
alluding to, that evil is sort of the test for the existence of evil. And I posted on Facebook, I think it was yesterday. I made this AI image of two team t-shirts. One was blue and white, right, that
Mhm.
representing the flag of Israel,
Mhm.
and one was
Mhm.
red and green and right, which represents the flag of Iran. And the blue and white one said good, and the other one said evil. And I wrote in the post, some of you may have seen it, pick a team, and you have to have evil in order for us to earn merit to choose the good.
Right.
That's
Makes
another
sense.
level of
Yeah.
understanding it.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Martina, you want to say something?
Yes, there is later in Devarim actually also the Bible verse coming up. I set before you evil and death and good and life, and choose the good. So it
Right.
says it right there. Yeah.
Right. That
Thank you for your teaching, though. It was
yeah,
wonderful.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Valerie?
Um, the God creating evil in the Tanakh, it says that he made evil and he made good. And if evil happens to a city, that he cause it. This is a wrestle that even back in our own, other religion history, in Bible classes, everybody, well, God wouldn't do that. And it's like, we make God in our image instead of us conforming to his image. And so we have to wrestle with how these things can exist, but what he says is true. And if he created it and everything is in him and with him, the I think most Christians don't even know that. Even Paul said in one of his teachings, he was doing Jewish thought, and he said to the people that we in God we live and move and have our being, which is exactly what you just taught a few minutes earlier. But people have a hard time because they haven't studied the Jewish part of the equation. They can't comprehend that very well.
Listen, I'm
And
giving you a Jewish paradigm that most people in the world don't share,
yes,
right?
right.
And it's up to you to accept it or not accept it as it works for you or it doesn't work for you. But I'm saying this is the lesson that Moshe is giving to his people. And it is a lesson for until the Messianic era when we understand everything better, um, to
Which is
sustain
pretty cool.
us.
Yeah, we have to accept it being true because the scripture's totally talking about it. Like we don't have to have all the answers for why bad things happen to good people, but we do have to understand that it's his creation and we're part of it.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Right. All right, listen, I'm sensitive to the time. I know that we've gone over an hour. It is very, very I'm so happy to be back with you, and I really appreciate your time and attention. And I have a few things I want to send you. I'll put it in the WhatsApp group, and God willing, I'll see you guys next week.
Can you add that plaque too? Your plaque you just showed us? Can you
You
take
want
a
a
picture
picture?
of that
Sure, with
and that as
pleasure.
well?
Okay. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Rivka.